The wind, a bitter knife honed on the distant snow-capped peaks of the Lost River Range, sliced through Elara Vance's threadbare coat, each gust a fresh reminder of her dwindling reserves. Days had bled into a grey, indistinguishable misery, the gnawing ache in her belly a constant companion, her world shrunk to the singular desperate pursuit of warmth and sustenance. Her left leg, a traitorous anchor of scarred tissue and unyielding pain from the fall that had stolen her life as a rider, throbbed with a vengeance, each step a carefully negotiated agony across the frozen, unforgiving earth. She remembered a different self, a girl who had danced with horses, light and fearless, her body a seamless extension of their powerful grace, the wind then a playful friend, not this cruel tormentor. That girl was a ghost, a bright, fleeting memory against the grim canvas of her present. Now she was a cripple, a burden, a word that had been hissed at her by lips once kind, now twisted with impatience and pity. Pride, a stubborn, flickering ember in the hollow of her chest, was all that kept her from sinking to her knees in the dust of the trail and simply giving up. It had been that same pride that made her walk away from the last meager charity, the stale bread and condescending glances, choosing the savage uncertainty of the road over the slow suffocation of dependence. The sprawling, frost-kissed plains stretched before her, vast and indifferent, offering no solace, only the distant, skeletal promise of Marcus Thorne's Bar M ranch, its fences a faint, bayou verblashed and tall. Dark line against the bruised horizon. Wood smoke, a thin, tantalizing ribbon on the wind, had been her only guide for the past hour, a siren's song of warmth and, perhaps, a morsel of food she might earn, not beg for. Her stomach clenched, a hollow, painful drum. She stumbled, her bad leg giving way, and caught herself with a gasp, leaning heavily against a weathered fence post, the rough wood biting into her palm. Her vision swam, the world tilting precariously. She was so tired, a weariness that settled deeper than her bones, into the very marrow of her spirit. The Bar M Thorne. The name was legend in these parts, a man of immense wealth, a cattle baron who ruled his empire with a firm, solitary hand. Some called him hard, even ruthless, others whispered of a buried kindness, a fairness that was as unyielding as his will. Elara had no illusions, she expected nothing. A day's work perhaps, mucking stalls or mending tack if her hands, stiff with cold, would obey. Anything to quell the relentless hunger and earn a place by a fire for a single night. She pushed herself upright, the effort monumental, and limped onward towards the distant ranch house, a dark sentinel against the pale, wintry sky. Her breath misted before her, each exhalation a small, visible piece of her fading strength. She saw him before he saw her, a figure on horseback, powerful and erect, silhouetted against the dying sun. Marcus Thorne. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding, an extension of the rugged, untamed land he owned. As he drew closer, she could make out the stern set of his jaw, the deep lines etched around his eyes that seemed to miss nothing, that were currently fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He reined in his magnificent black stallion a few yards away, the horse snorting, its breath pluming in the frigid air. Thorne himself was an imposing figure, clad in practical, dark-range clothes, his face weathered, unreadable. He said nothing for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her ragged appearance, the telltale drag of her left leg, the desperation she tried so hard to mask behind a veneer of stoic resolve. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. Fear, yes, but also that damnable pride flaring up, making her lift her chin a fraction higher. She would not cower. She would not beg. "You're a long way from anywhere, girl." His voice finally came, deep and resonant, not unkind, but devoid of any overt warmth. It was a statement of fact, an observation. Elara swallowed, her throat dry. "Looking for work," she managed, her voice raspy, thinner than she intended. She hated the weakness in it. He surveyed her again, slowly. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, lingered on her injured leg. Not much work for a gimp on a cattle ranch in winter. The word gimp struck her like a physical blow. Casual in its cruelty, yet she suspected it wasn't meant to be deliberately malicious. merely a blunt assessment from a man who dealt in realities. Still, it stung, scraping raw old wounds. "I can work," she insisted, her voice gaining a little strength from indignation. "I know horses. I can mend, clean. I'm not afraid of hard labor." He considered this, his expression unchanging. Elara could feel the last of her energy seeping away, the cold biting deeper. The world was starting to fuzz at the edges. She fought against it, focusing on his stern face, willing herself to remain upright. He saw the tremor that ran through her, the almost imperceptible sway. He saw the faint blue tinge around her lips. He was a man who understood survival, who recognized the signs of a body pushed beyond its limits. And beneath the grime and the rags, beneath the visible disability, he saw something else, a flicker in her eyes, a stubborn resilience that reminded him of a wild, cornered thing, refusing to yield. He grunted a non-committal sound. Then, he dismounted in one fluid motion, his presence suddenly more overwhelming up close. "The bunkhouse won't have you, not in your state. And Cook would skin me for bringing in strays without warning." Elara's heart sank. Rejection, she should have expected it. She turned, ready to limp away, to disappear back into the vast indifference of the plains, though where she would go, what she would do, she had no idea. But his voice stopped her. "There's an old line cabin, east of here. Got a stove. Firewood stacked." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "And there's a side of bacon and some beans in the stores. Enough to see a body through a night or two." Elara stared at him, confused, hope a fragile, hesitant thing unfurling within her. Was this charity from Marcus Thorne? He gestured curtly with his head. "Come on, it's a fair walk, or can you ride?" The question hung in the air. Could she ride? The ghost of the girl who danced with horses winced. "My leg," she began. He nodded, understanding. "I'll fetch a gentler mount from the stables." "Wait here." He swung back onto his stallion and galloped towards the distant ranch buildings, leaving Elara standing alone, shivering not just from the cold now but from a bewildering surge of emotion. He hadn't turned her away. He had offered something, a chance. The shadow of his figure against the darkening sky was the last thing she saw before the world finally dissolved into a merciful blackness, her body surrendering to the exhaustion she had fought for so long. The first thing Elara registered was warmth, a deep, penetrating heat that seeped into her chilled bones, coaxing her back from the brink of unconsciousness. It was a blessed, unfamiliar sensation. Then came the scent of wood smoke, rich and comforting, and the faint, savory aroma of coffee. She lay still, her eyes closed, trying to piece together the fragmented memories, the biting wind, the imposing figure of Marcus Thorne, his gruff offer, and then nothing. Had she dreamed it? Had she finally succumbed to the cold, her desperate mind conjuring a phantom hope? She risked opening her eyes a slit. Rough-hewn wooden beams crossed a low ceiling. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a cheerful fire crackling within, its flames casting dancing shadows. She was lying on a narrow cot, covered by a thick, surprisingly soft wool blanket. This was no dream. This was the line cabin Thorne had spoken of. She pushed herself up slowly, her head swimming, her injured leg protesting with a dull, insistent ache. The cabin was small, utilitarian, but clean, and blessedly warm. A worn wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center, and on a small shelf, she saw the promised supplies, a slab of bacon, a sack of beans, a tin of coffee. A wave of gratitude so potent it almost brought tears to her eyes washed over her. He had kept his word, but how had she gotten here? She certainly hadn't walked. Her last memory was of him riding away, leaving her by the fence line. A faint noise from outside, the snort of a horse, made her heart jump. The cabin door creaked open and Marcus Thorne stepped inside, filling the doorway, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He carried a bucket in one hand and a small laden sack in the other. He stopped when he saw her awake, his expression as unreadable as ever. "So, you decided to rejoin the living," he observed, his tone dry. He set the bucket down, it was filled with fresh water, and placed the sack on the table. "Cook sent some stew." Figured you'd need something more than beans to start. Elara stared at him, speechless for a moment. You brought me here? She finally managed, her voice still weak. He shrugged, avoiding her gaze as he moved to poke at the fire. Couldn't very well leave you to freeze on my fence line. Bad for the reputation of the Bar M. His gruffness, she was beginning to realize, might be a shield, a way of deflecting any notion of softness. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Thorne. Don't, he said curtly. Just eat. Get your strength back. He ladled some of the thick, fragrant stew from a pot nestled in the sack into a tin bowl and handed it to her, along with a spoon. The aroma alone made her stomach ache with a desperate longing. She took the bowl, her hands trembling slightly. The first spoonful was heaven, warm and nourishing, chasing away the gnawing emptiness that had been her constant companion for so long. She ate slowly, savoring every mouthful, acutely aware of Thorne's presence. He didn't watch her eat, instead busying himself with checking the cabin's meager supplies, ensuring the woodbox was full, his movements efficient, economical. There was a quiet competence about him that was both intimidating and reassuring. He was a man accustomed to command, to taking charge, yet there was no arrogance in his actions, just a practical attention to detail. Elara wondered about him, this solitary, powerful man. What had made him offer her this refuge, however temporary? Pity? Unlikely. A sense of duty? Perhaps. Or had he truly seen something in her, some flicker of the cowgirl she once was, buried beneath the layers of hardship and pain? When she had finished the stew, a comfortable warmth spreading through her, she felt a sliver of her old self return. Mr. Thorne, she began, you mentioned work. I meant what I said. I want to earn my keep. I can't ride like I used to, but... He turned, his gaze direct. What happened to your leg? The question was blunt, but not unkind. Elara hesitated. The story was a painful one, a tale of ambitions shattered, of trust betrayed. She looked down at her hands. A fall, she said, her voice low. Horse spooked during a storm, went over a small ravine, leg got caught, crushed pretty bad. Doctor said I was lucky to keep it. Lucky? It hadn't felt like luck at the time, or in the long, painful months of recovery, or in the subsequent descent into poverty as her old life, the life she loved, became impossible. And the folks you were with? He pressed, his eyes unwavering. Elara's mouth tightened. The outfit I rode for, well, a crippled rider isn't much use. They paid me off what little they owed and moved on. There was more to it. The subtle shunning, the pitying glances that felt worse than outright scorn, the dawning realization that her skills, once her pride, were now irrelevant. She didn't voice these bitter dregs. Thorne nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He didn't offer platitudes or empty sympathy, for which Elara was grateful. Instead, he said, the Bar M is a working ranch, Miss Vance. We don't carry passengers, but the stables always need an extra hand. Mucking out, mending tack, grooming, simple work, but necessary. If you think you're up to it, after a day or two of rest, you can report to Jed, the foreman. Tell him I sent you. He'll find something for you. Pay ain't much, but it comes with keep in the small bunk above the harness room if you can manage the stairs. Elara stared at him, hope blooming anew, stronger this time, less fragile. A job, a real job, a chance to stand on her own 2 feet, metaphorically at least. I can manage the stairs, Mr. Thorne, she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. And I'm not afraid of hard work, thank you. He merely grunted again, then moved towards the door. Rest up. Don't overdo it. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. And Elara? She looked up, surprised he had used her first name. The fall? It wasn't the horse's fault, was it? She thought for a moment. No, sir, it wasn't. Just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement, and then he was gone. Leaving Elara alone with a crackling fire, a full belly, and the first stirrings of a future she hadn't dared to imagine just hours before. The silence of the cabin was no longer oppressive, but filled with a quiet, tentative promise. 2 days later, Elara, her strength somewhat restored by food and warmth, though her leg still protested with a persistent ache, presented herself at the Bar M stables. The foreman, Jedediah Jed Sisk, was a wiry, weathered man with eyes like flint chips and a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. He listened to her curt explanation. "Mr. Thorne sent me, said you'd have work," with an expression that hovered somewhere between skepticism and outright disbelief. His gaze lingered pointedly on her pronounced limp as she walked across the stable yard. "Thorne sent you?" he drawled, making no attempt to hide his surprise. "He know about that leg?" Elara's chin tilted up. "He does, and I told him I can work." Jed spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Work on a ranch like the Bar M ain't for the faint of heart, nor for, well." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Elara felt the familiar sting of judgment, the dismissal that had become a constant companion since her accident. But Thorne's unexpected intervention had kindled a spark of defiance in her that had been dormant for too long. "I'm not asking for favors, foreman," she said, her voice steady. "Just a chance to prove I can earn my keep. Mr. Thorne seemed to think I could." The mention of Thorne's name seemed to give Jed pause. He grumbled under his breath, then gestured with a calloused thumb towards a pile of dirty harnesses. "All right, Miss Vance, you can start there. Clean 'em and oil 'em. Every strap, every buckle, and I mean clean. We'll see how long your grit lasts." And so began Elara's tenure at the Bar M. The work was hard, relentless, and often painful. Her leg throbbed constantly by the end of each day, and the stairs to the small drafty room above the harness shed were a nightly torment. But she persevered, driven by a desperate need to prove not just to Jed and the other hands, but to herself, that she was not useless, that she still had worth. The ranch hands, a rough-hewn collection of cowboys, mostly ignored her, their initial curiosity giving way to a kind of indifferent acceptance once they saw she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. A few, however, made their disdain clear, with sly remarks about Thorne's charity case, or exaggerated imitations of her limp when they thought she wasn't looking. Elara learned to swallow the bitterness, to meet their cruelty with a quiet, unwavering dignity. Her solace came from the horses. Though she could no longer ride with the skill and abandon of her past, she found a deep, abiding comfort in their presence. She moved among them with a gentle confidence, her voice soft, her touch sure. They responded to her in a way they didn't always to the rougher hands of the cowboys. She had a knack for calming a skittish colt, for finding the source of a hidden ailment, for simply understanding their silent language. Marcus Thorne was a mostly absent presence in her daily life, a distant figure overseeing his vast domain, yet Elara often felt his unseen observation. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of him watching her from the porch of the main house as she worked in the stables, his expression unreadable. He never interfered, never offered praise or criticism, but his gaze made her work harder, strive to be better. One evening, as she was carefully stitching a tear in a well-worn saddle blanket, her fingers aching, Jed Sisk paused by her workbench. He watched her for a moment, his usual scowl firmly in place. "That mare Bluebell," he said, jerking his head towards a stall. "Been off her feed. Vet can't find nothing wrong. Thorne's worried. She's one of his prize breeders." Elara knew Bluebell. She'd noticed the mare's listlessness, the dullness in her usually bright eyes. She'd spent a little extra time with her, talking to her softly, running a hand over her coat. "She seems sad more than sick," Elara offered quietly, not looking up from her stitching. Jed snorted. "Sad? Horses don't get sad, girl. They get sick or they don't." Elara didn't argue. But later that night, long after the other hands had retired to the bunkhouse, she slipped back into the stables. She went to Bluebell's stall, carrying a small, withered apple she had saved from her meager rations. The mare nickered softly as she approached. Elara spoke to her in low, soothing tones, stroking her neck, her fingers gently probing, remembering all the lore her father, a horse trader, had taught her. She noticed a slight swelling, almost imperceptible, high on the mare's flank, hidden beneath the fall of her mane when she was standing normally. It was tender to the touch. It wasn't a sickness, she suspected, but an old injury, perhaps poorly healed and now aggravated, causing the mare chronic, low-grade pain that stole her appetite and spirit. The next morning, she approached Thorne as he was preparing for his morning ride. It took all her courage to speak to him directly, to offer an opinion that contradicted the vet and his own experienced foreman. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her heart pounding, "about Bluebell, I think I might know what's troubling her." He turned, his eyebrows raised slightly, giving her his full attention. The intensity of his gaze was unnerving, but she held her ground, explaining her observation, her theory about an old, deep-seated injury. He listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment, simply looking from her to the stables. Then, "Show me." Together they went to Bluebell. Elara gently showed him the spot, the subtle swelling. Thorne ran his own experienced hand over it, his touch surprisingly light. Bluebell flinched almost imperceptibly. Thorne looked at Elara, then back at the mare, a new light in his eyes. "The vet missed this," he said, more to himself than to her. "Jed missed this." He looked at Elara again, a long, considering look. "You have a good eye, Miss Vance." A good hand. Coming from Marcus Thorne, it was high praise indeed, a validation that warmed Elara more than any fire. It was a small victory, but for Elara, it felt like a turning point, a sign that perhaps, even with a crippled leg, she still had something valuable to offer. Something that went beyond just mucking stalls. The incident with Bluebell subtly shifted Elara's standing on the bar M, at least in Marcus Thorne's eyes, if not immediately in Jed Sisk's or the other hands. Thorne had called in a different veterinarian, an older, more experienced man from a distant town, who confirmed Elara's diagnosis, an old muscle tear, deep and poorly healed, now inflamed. With careful treatment and rest, Bluebell slowly began to recover, her appetite returning, the light rekindling in her eyes. Thorne didn't make a grand show of Elara's contribution, but he started to seek her opinion more often regarding the horses, sometimes asking her to accompany him on his rounds of the stables. Listening quietly to her observations, Jed Sisk, though still gruff, began to delegate tasks to her that required a gentler touch or a keener eye, tending to foaling mares, working with difficult colts. The other hands, noticing the shift in Thorne's attitude, tempered their open scorn, though a current of resentment still lingered among a few. Elara's life settled into a routine, demanding and often painful, but underpinned by a growing sense of purpose. The small room above the harness shed, though drafty, began to feel like her own space, a sanctuary. She spent her meager wages on small comforts, a thicker blanket, a new bar of soap, occasionally a worn book from a traveling peddler. She was still an outsider, still marked by her disability, but she was no longer starving, no longer invisible. She was Elara Vance, a hand on the bar M, a woman with a quiet skill for horses. Her past, the vibrant, fearless rider she had been, still haunted her dreams, a bittersweet ache of what was lost. But the sharp edges of that grief were slowly softening, replaced by a tentative acceptance of her new reality. She found joy in small things, the nuzzle of a grateful horse, the successful gentling of a frightened colt, a rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval from Thorne. Marcus Thorne himself remained an enigma. He was a man of few words, his emotions kept under tight rein. Elara learned to read the subtle cues, the slight softening around his eyes when he spoke of a favorite horse, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw when something displeased him. She knew he carried his own burdens, his own unspoken sorrows. The main ranch house, though large and imposing, had a quiet, empty feel to it. Cook, a bustling, kind-hearted woman named Martha, sometimes spoke of Thorne's late wife, lost to fever many years ago, and of a son who had left the ranch under a cloud, never to return. These fragments of his past painted a picture of a man marked by loss, a man who had perhaps walled off his heart to protect it from further pain. Elara understood that kind of self-preservation. One blustery afternoon, as Elara was meticulously cleaning a complex bridle, Thorne entered the harness room shaking snowflakes from his hat. He watched her work for a moment, her fingers, though chapped and calloused, moving with a practiced deftness. "You have a good seat with a needle, Miss Vance," he observed. My mother taught me, Elara replied, a faint smile touching her lips at the memory. She said a cowgirl needed to know more than just how to ride. She needed to know how to mend what breaks, whether it's leather or spirits. Thorne was silent for a moment, then said, There are ledgers in the office, accounts. They've been neglected. Jed has no head for figures, and my last clerk left for the goldfields. He paused, his gaze direct. Can you read and write? Do you have a mind for numbers? Elara's heart gave a small leap. This was unexpected. Yes, sir, she said. My father believed in schooling, even for a girl. I can manage figures. Good, he said. Starting tomorrow, you can spend your mornings in the office. The stables can spare you for a few hours. The pay will be adjusted accordingly. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. It will be warmer than this harness room. Elara was stunned. An office job. Less physical strain on her leg, more pay. But more than that, it was a gesture of trust, a recognition of abilities beyond her physical ones. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. He merely nodded, his expression unreadable, and left. As Elara looked around the dim, cold harness room, a wave of profound gratitude washed over her. Marcus Thorne had found her starving and broken at his fence line. He had offered her shelter, then work, and now a position of trust. He was a hard man, a solitary man, but beneath the gruff exterior, Elara sensed a deep, if well hidden, wellspring of fairness, perhaps even kindness. She still didn't understand why he had chosen to help her, but she was beginning to feel that perhaps, just perhaps, she was finding a place where her broken pieces could begin to mend, where her spirit, like the leather she so carefully stitched, could be made whole again. The wind howled outside, but inside Elara, a small warm flame of hope burned brighter than ever. Elara's transition to spending mornings in the ranch office marked another subtle but significant shift in her life at the Bar M. The office itself was a starkly masculine space, dominated by a large, scarred oak desk, shelves filled with dusty ledgers, and maps of Thorne's vast holdings pinned to the walls. It smelled of old paper, leather, and Thorne's faint, lingering scent of tobacco and horses. Initially, she felt out of place, an intruder in this inner sanctum of his empire. The ledgers were indeed neglected, a chaotic jumble of figures and hastily scrawled notes. But Elara, with her neat hand and methodical mind, slowly began to bring order to the chaos. She discovered a quiet satisfaction in the task, in the precise logic of numbers, a stark contrast to the often unpredictable nature of working with animals and men. Her mornings were spent in focused concentration, her afternoons still dedicated to the stables, a balance that suited her. Her leg appreciated the respite from constant standing, and her mind welcomed the new challenge. Marcus Thorne would often be present in the office, working at his own desk, a silent, formidable presence. He rarely spoke, but Elara was acutely aware of him. Sometimes, he would ask her a question about a particular entry, his voice a low rumble, and she would answer clearly and concisely. He was a man who valued efficiency and accuracy, and Elara strove to provide both. She learned more about the vast scope of his operations, the intricate web of cattle sales, supply routes, and land leases. She saw the shrewd businessman beneath the rugged rancher. One cold afternoon, as a blizzard raged outside, trapping everyone indoors, Thorne found Elara in the office, long after her usual morning hours were over. She was hunched over a particularly problematic ledger, a frown of concentration on her face. She hadn't even heard him enter. "Still at it, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice startling her. She looked up, flustered. "Oh, Mr. Thorne, I just wanted to finish reconciling this account. It wasn't balancing." He came to stand beside her, looking over her shoulder. His closeness was unnerving, his presence filling the small space. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint, clean scent of winter air clinging to his coat. He pointed to a column of figures. "There's your error. Old man Hemlock at the feed store has a habit of double charging for delivery if you don't watch him like a hawk." Elara checked the figures again, her cheeks warming. He was right. "Thank you, sir," she murmured, feeling a fool for missing it. "You have a sharp eye for detail, Miss Vance," he said, and there was a hint of something almost like approval in his tone. "A necessary skill in this business. And in life." He paused, then added, "Martha's made coffee in the main house. You look like you could use some. And perhaps something to eat that isn't stable fare." Elara was taken aback. An invitation to the main house? She had only ever glimpsed its interior from afar. "Oh, I shouldn't impose, sir." "Nonsense," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The blizzard's not letting up any time soon. Come." The main house was surprisingly warm and welcoming, despite its size. Martha, cook, greeted Elara with a genuine smile and a steaming mug of coffee that tasted like ambrosia. Thorne led Elara into a comfortable, firelit study, a room filled with books and maps, softer and more personal than the Stark office. He gestured for her to sit in a worn leather armchair by the fire, while he took the one opposite. For a while they sat in a companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. It was the most peaceful Elara had felt in years. Then Thorne began to speak, not about ranch business, but about the land, about the history of the Bar M, about his father who had carved it out of the wilderness. He spoke of his late wife, her love for the wildflowers that bloomed in the high meadows in spring, his voice softening with a remembered tenderness that touched Elara deeply. He didn't speak of his estranged son, and Sofing. Elara listened, her heart aching with a mixture of sympathy and a strange sense of connection. This stern, solitary man was revealing glimpses of the heart he kept so carefully guarded. He was sharing his burdens, his memories with her, a crippled, once-starving cowgirl he had found at his fence line. Why? As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm, a storm of emotion, was brewing within Elara. Gratitude, respect, and something more, something she dared not name, was stirring for Marcus Thorne. He had not just given her a job, he had given her dignity. He had seen past her broken body to the unbroken spirit within. He had, in his own gruff, undemonstrative way, begun to carry her, not physically, but in his consideration, in his trust, towards a place of healing. A place where she might one day feel whole again. He had offered her a seat by his fire, a place in his quiet world, and in doing so he was, piece by piece, carrying her towards his closely guarded heart. The realization was as breathtaking and as terrifying as the blizzard outside. The blizzard that had forced Elara into the unexpected intimacy of Marcus Thorne's study marked a quiet turning point. The invisible walls between them, already porous, seemed to dissolve further in the shared warmth of the fire and the hushed confidences exchanged. Thorne didn't revert to his former distant demeanor. While he remained a man of few words, a new ease settled between them. He would often join her for a cup of coffee in the office after her morning's work with the ledgers, sometimes discussing ranch matters, other times falling into a comfortable silence, simply sharing the space. Elara, in turn, found herself speaking more freely to him, sharing memories of her own family, her dreams before the accident, her fears and hopes for the future, however uncertain. She discovered he was a keen listener, his occasional insightful comments revealing a depth of understanding that belied his rugged exterior. Her skill with the accounts proved invaluable, and Thorne increasingly relied on her judgment, not just with figures but with correspondence and managing supplies. She became, in essence, his unofficial assistant, a role that gave her a profound sense of worth and belonging. The physical demands of the ranch were still a challenge for her leg, but her spirit, nurtured by Thorne's quiet respect and her own growing confidence, was stronger than ever. Even Jed Sisk, though he'd never admit it aloud, had developed a grudging respect for her tenacity and her undeniable knack with the horses. The other hands, for the most part, accepted her presence, some even seeking her out for her quiet advice with a troublesome mount. The whispers about Thorne's charity case had long since faded, replaced by a recognition of Elara Vance as a capable woman who had earned her place. One spring evening, as the last rays of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of rose and violet, Thorne found Elara by the corral, watching the yearlings frolic. She leaned against the fence, her weight off her injured leg, a soft smile on her face. The pain was a constant companion, but moments like these, witnessing the untamed beauty and vitality of the horses, brought her a deep, abiding peace. "They remind you of what you lost?" Thorne asked, his voice gentle as he came to stand beside her. Elara didn't flinch from the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but more often now they remind me of what I still have, a love for them, an understanding. It's different now, but it's still there." Thorne was silent for a moment, looking out at the horses, then at Elara, her face softened by the twilight, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength that he had come to admire deeply. "Elara," he began, his voice a little rougher than usual, "this ranch, it's a demanding life. A lonely one, at times." He paused, as if searching for the right words, a rare occurrence for him. "But it doesn't have to be. Entirely." Elara's heart quickened. She looked at him, her gaze questioning. "The Bar M needs more than just a good hand with horses or a sharp mind for ledgers." He continued, his eyes the color of a stormy sky, now holding a warmth she had never seen there before. "It needs a heart, a steady hand. Someone who sees its beauty, not just its burdens." He turned to face her fully. "You, Elara, you have brought a light to this place, to me, that I thought long extinguished." His calloused hand, hesitant at first, reached out and gently covered hers where it rested on the corral fence. His touch was warm, firm, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I know I'm older, set in my ways," he said, a hint of vulnerability in his voice that made her heart ache. "And you deserve a life free from hardship. A life I might not be able to fully provide in the way a younger man could." "Marcus," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, using his first name for the first time. "You have given me more than I ever thought I would have again. You gave me back my pride, my purpose. You saw me when others saw only a cripple." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not look away. "What you offer, what I think you're offering, it isn't about what you can provide. It's about sharing the path, burdens and beauty together." He searched her face, his own expression filled with a profound, hopeful tenderness. "Then, Elara Vance," he said, his voice husky, "would you consider sharing your path with an old, solitary rancher? Would you make this house, this ranch, your home? With me?" Elara's smile, when it came, was like the dawn breaking over the high peaks, radiant and full of promise. "Yes, Marcus," she said softly. "Yes, I would." He didn't sweep her into a dramatic embrace, that wasn't his way or hers. Instead, his hand tightened on hers, a silent, binding promise. He had found her, a disabled cowgirl, starving and alone, at the edge of his vast domain. And in the quiet unfolding of days, through shared work, understanding, and a burgeoning, unexpected love, he had carried her, not just to safety, but into the very center of his guarded heart, where she, in turn, had brought healing and light to his own solitary existence. Their new life wouldn't be without challenges, but they would face them together, two resilient souls who had found an unexpected sanctuary in each other, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, love, like the most determined wildflower, could find a way to bloom. Perhaps you have faced moments where you felt broken, overlooked, or defined by your limitations. What does it truly mean to be seen by another person, for them to look past the scars and perceive the strength within? Marcus Thorne offered Elara more than just shelter. He offered her dignity, purpose, and eventually his heart. He saw her potential when she could barely see it herself. In your own life, who has been the Marcus to your Elara, or have you had the opportunity to be that person for someone else, recognizing their worth when the world dismissed them? The journey from despair to hope is often paved with small acts of kindness, unexpected opportunities, and the courage to trust again. Elara's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of compassion and acceptance. What does it take to rebuild a life after loss, to find new strengths when old ones are gone? If this tale of a disabled cowgirl who found not just survival but a loving home in the heart of a wealthy rancher has touched you, please consider liking this video. Subscribe for more stories of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human heart. And share your thoughts in the comments below. What does it mean to truly carry someone in your heart? We look forward to reading your reflections.